Welcome to the Scariest Things podcast, your gateway into the trends and tropes of the horror genre. This is episode 125, Horror Documentaries. I'm your host, Eric Lee, and as always, I am joined by my longtime friend and cohort,
Alistair Cook. No, Mike Campbell.
And the lovely and talented...
Williams. Thank you, Eric.
You were doing Alistair Cook, right?
Or David Attenborough.
Okay, sorry.
Either way.
Yeah.
So,
all I know is like some fancy British guy. Yeah.
So this is the academic side of horror.
Eric is wearing a smoking jacket, and he does have a pipe in his mouth, which I think explains kind of that affect.
I haven't had this much fun in years. This is, we do our best to try and educate all of our listeners
And
to
get
the ways
educated.
of horror. And we learn in the process a lot about the genre just by watching movies. But one of the best ways to get yourself knowledgeable about the horror genre, besides listening to the Scariest Things podcast, is to watch horror documentaries. And so this is taking it to the exponential level. It's Scariest Things times documentaries equals your brain is full of horror goodness, right? So that is the equation, and I'm sure it's something. There's probably some algebraic component there, but I was so bad at math. I did not receive that special part of the Asian gene that gives you that extra kick of mathematics.
But that is the thing that's great about horror documentaries, though, is like I almost always learn something, and I almost always discover a movie I've never seen or heard of.
Or it takes a movie that you know of intimately and tells you a lot of things that you didn't know about it.
100%. We are absolutely going to get there with the film that I picked out.
Yeah.
Horror documentaries are great. I mean, it's like a big bowl of mashed potatoes. It's comfort food. It's like diving back into a film that you love and know and trust through a completely different prism.
Yeah,
and that's fun. That's great, and it just feels comfortable.
Well, yeah, and I love as mentioned, for movies that I love, to know more about them, and then I can be even more smarty pants than I already am.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But there are some which are also it's like looking into a mirror about why do we love this genre, and there are a number of films, some of them that I didn't pick. There were so many that I would have loved to have picked, and I did a dead list of top 20 documentaries that's been posted. All three of my selections here are on that list.
Oh my goodness.
But there are some which are done by the fans for the fans. There are some that are done by people who were like underdog movies that haven't gotten their due, and now all of a sudden through whatever means that they become cult hits. There are some which talk about the history of fear or the history of and lore of storytelling, and or
what do you think the first horror documentary was? And I'm not saying this as a quiz because I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know what Hexen.
Probably.
Yeah, I think.
That kind of. Yeah, I mean, but that wasn't a documentary. It wasn't a horror documentary about horror films. It was.
Yeah. But it's about witchcraft through the ages.
Yeah, it was a movie about
and it purported itself to be
I was thinking
factual.
A documentary, a horror one. Yeah.
And for their efforts and their dramatics, they got themselves banned.
So you're parking the marker right on Haxan as the first horror documentary.
Yeah, I would.
Okay,
I would.
All right. I don't begrudge you that.
Yeah.
I think that's totally fair.
So did you select Hexen?
No.
Okay.
No. I talked about Haxan when we talked about the horror films from the 1920s.
Right. Which the pickings were kind of slim back then, but that was
indeed
certainly one that I think horror. Our friends at Portland Horror Film Festival love to cut in snippets of Hexen.
Yeah.
In their B-roll kind of little.
Well, they just put out a Criterion Collection version of Haxan a couple years ago. So yeah, you can actually get like a super, super nice quality version of it, even though the film is from the 1920s.
Right.
And allegedly the soundtrack to the film that was originally played in the 1920s does not exist anymore.
Yeah. And then there's some other things that come out where you get full, lifetime achievement kind of things for directors and actors.
Right.
Who are in the genre, and those are always good. There's always when you used to get physical media, and you still can. But, one of the ways that they would get you to buy the director's cut collection, you pay extra for a movie that you've already seen, is that they will have extras like documentaries of behind the scenes footage.
Oh, sure.
And for not one of my selections, but one of my favorites was The Thing had a absolutely brilliant documentary that went with it that interviewed almost all the cast, and they were commenting on how disappointed that they were that the movie was a failure at the time. And they said, I was really banking on this thing to give me a career boost, and it really didn't.
But for the record, one of the films I did watch, I watched a VHS copy, so
there you go.
No big deal.
Okay.
No big deal.
So there's
VHS is still out there.
It is
still out there kicking around.
But if that's one of your recommendations, folks, I hope you have a VHS player. So you
can still find them.
I think most of the big franchises out there. I know that Nightmare's got a big documentary about that whole series. I think Friday the 13th has got a documentary about theirs. Certainly Psycho's got at least a few, because Hitchcock, everybody wants to talk about Hitchcock. The Shining, you got Room 237, which is a weird movie about weird folks.
Slow down on your list here. You might be running into many of the things we're going to be talking about right now.
Fair enough.
One is Save it 400 minutes long, almost 7 hours.
Oh,
that's too much.
That's a lot of documentary.
Yeah, I didn't go there.
Although you can always you could treat it like like you binge Netflix. You just watch them and watch it for an hour and then sort of find a pause point. But really, you don't want to have to do that. So, I guess I will lead off.
Yeah.
With
tell us what you got.
I've got a horror adjacent movie.
Okay.
And this one might be one that could be near and dear to Mike, but I don't know if you've seen it yet. This is 24 by 36, a movie about movie posters.
Right.
Directed by Kevin Burke and produced by friend of the podcast, Travis Stevens.
Right.
Hey, Travis, if you're listening, good job on this one.
Yeah. Heck yeah. And we did not even talk to him about this when we talked to him a couple weeks ago.
I made brief mention of some of the stuff that he had done in the past, but we didn't talk to him about his production credits. We were talking. Travis is the director of Jacob's Wife.
Right.
And so if you haven't caught that episode, go back about 4 episodes.
And it is currently streaming everywhere.
Yeah.
Jacob's Wife.
Yep. So 24 by 36 is the history of the rise and fall and rise again of the art of the movie poster. And as we have often talked about in the Scariest Things, horror movies have led the charge for the movie poster business and are the most likely posters not to stoop to the modern headshot-only movie poster. In fact, we celebrate it every year on our awards show. And this year our winner was The Pale Door, which was a great and evocative poster that was way better than the movie that it was trying to pitch.
The movie was terrible.
So this documentary follows the history of the movie poster from its heyday in the golden era and the beginning of lithography, or it goes all the way back talking about the lithography of the 1800s, but essentially that playbills that would get put up to advertise that they would do lithographs. And so it follows that to the campy hyperbolic exclamations of the Atomic Age posters and the racy Grindhouse fare and the adventurous posters of the 1980s. And if you think about things like the Goonies or Raiders of the Lost Ark, how those very painterly, where you could look at a movie poster and you could see sort of an encapsulation of what it would feel like to be in the movie.
Right.
Usually lots of things happening in the background, and you could you could stand in line at the theater and look at it and just find all the little details, and those are always cool.
Who do they interview in the
lot of people.
Okay. They don't like lean on a handful of like artists or directors or anything like that.
Well, they talk to all the big poster artists who are still alive.
Sure.
But you have Joe Dante was featured. But there's like Drew Struzan, Albert Callis, Reynold Brown. I mean, these guys are. You wouldn't know. You will know about them. You'll find out about them through this, but you will definitely recognize their movies.
Right.
And so, they also hit the 1990s when the world of movie posters that we know now is the bland formula of the star headshots, which is apparently driven by actors saying, "I want to see my face on the poster," and I am it's like, and they get, and that's in their
and my face only.
That's in their contract, and it's like, I want to be the center head, and then everybody else is smaller heads than me. Or if you're John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, you split it literally in half.
Right. Face off.
Or you do the same thing. A few good men. You have Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise split down the middle.
Right.
It is a cliche, and it is boring, and it is nothing like The Creature from the Black Lagoon or The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Right.
Or
Texas Chainsaw.
Or Vertigo or My Fair Lady or any of these just wonderful, wonderful posters. Yeah, Texas Chainsaw is a great one.
Yeah.
The Grindhouse movies were just they were bloody and evocative and sexy and all the kinds of things that you have to do to pitch when you don't actually have when your marketing campaign is limited to print because you can't afford to actually do television advertising because you're a cheap Grindhouse, you're AIP. Right. So the other thing that it follows, and I can blame Liz for giving me the crack sample of the Mondo poster craze.
Yeah.
They go into great depth talking about how that was a reaction to the Alamo Drafthouse.
Right.
Saying, we're sick and tired of showing these uninteresting movie posters. Nobody wants to come in for these movie posters.
Right.
We're going to hire big-time artists to reimagine what these movie posters look like and make them limited editions. And they sell like hotcakes, and they're wonderful. And I now have the one right over here. I have this Thing poster, my favorite movie, and I got a wonderful poster that goes with it. And I have a Drew Struzan Creature from the Black Lagoon poster. I love these things, and it's having a physical memory of the movies, and that's what this talks about. And it's and I rattled off a number of these names, and again, you wouldn't recognize them, and I encourage you to watch 24 by 36.
Yeah.
To know these people.
Right.
And because I think we talked about in our previous episode in the Mummy movies that they're like another like makeup artists back in the day, like Jack Pierce.
Right.
People don't know. Some people don't know Tom Savini. Some people don't know Rick Baker.
Right.
But it's the kind of thing, if you're a horror movie fan, you should know these people because these are people who make things better, and also get to know about Mondo because the posters are so cool. They get to be expensive though.
So what's your favorite? What is your all-time favorite horror movie poster, Liz?
April Fool's Day.
Eric, what is your all-time favorite horror movie poster?
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
The original.
The original.
Okay, there you go.
Mike, what's yours?
I have no idea. That's like picking one of my babies. Probably like I would say like probably Texas Chainsaw. I mean that's such a great. I only throw that out because it's on the top of my head, but yeah, that's such a great.
Nightmare on Elm Street's got a great one.
It does. I
mean that's like you get to see Freddy's claw,
and
that is and it tells you kind of everything you need to know, and it's but
super quick.
But it's so weird because they talk about how people. They did a survey, and people apparently gravitate towards. They think that illustrations make it more like a cartoon, and it's like no. And
interesting.
But they come across and they do side by sides. Which of these they would show a movie poster with the headshots, and then one which is an artistic representation, and they say this looks more interesting, but I think I'm going to go see this movie because it's got Tom Cruise in it.
Oh, interesting.
And you go, come on, and that's what the marketing folks know.
And then you show up at the Mummy.
And that's
right. Whoops.
So that's got to be. I mean, that's got to explain why the hype machine is effectively died.
It is funny because that they talk to a number of the artists who do the Mondo type posters,
right?
And there's a couple of guys, and they said, well, we got a call from Warner Brothers, and they said that they actually have bought art. They asked them to redo box art for their I think Target to do like special editions, and they wanted them to do special covers for them. And they said, because we have your posters in our office. And it's like, that says something about the posters of the movies that we're having to redo because,
right,
your movie posters now suck. So we'd love to do it for you. Anyhow, 24 by 36. It's available for free on, I think, actually it might be for $2 on Amazon.
Right.
Liz, what's your first?
Okay. I am going to start with one that's new-ish on Shudder. It came out in 2020, April of 2020, so it might have been missed at the beginning of the pandemic. And this one is Cursed Films.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
This is just a 5-episode, 30 minutes apiece, and they cover some of the most infamous horror movies because the production of the films have been cursed.
Yeah.
So they cover The Exorcist, The Omen, Poltergeist, The Crow, and Twilight Zone, the movie.
Oh, yeah. All tragic circumstances.
Yeah. I think it was the Twilight Zone one and the Omen one where I was like, oh my God. I mean, people connected to all different parts of these films were dying in freak accidents, plane crashes. I mean, just nutso stuff. The Exorcist infamously has a killer in one of the scenes. He's in one of the hospital scenes.
A for real killer.
A for real convicted killer, yes, is in one of the scenes where Reagan's getting, what are they called, like a CAT scan or whatever?
Yeah.
Putting one of those things. And then The Crow, of course, we lost Brandon Lee in the production of that. And so each of these is only 30 minutes, and they have people involved in production and cast talking about these. So it's really cool to do a deep dive into some of these, but not really into the subject of the film, more in the production and all the crazy things that went on during the production. Season 2 is rumored to be coming up.
Ooh.
And according to the internet, what they think they're going to do, so I guess internet rumor is Rosemary's Baby, The Possession, Amityville, horror, and then The Conjuring, which that's interesting because I don't know anything about any crazy stuff surrounding The Conjuring. So I will definitely
stay tuned.
I look out on this. Yeah. So Shudder, if you're listening to this, you probably already have a Shudder subscription. If you don't, get one because in addition to awesome movies, they have a pretty decent documentary section, and they're doing a lot of original programming.
Shudder, I think, has really. I think they understand their role within the industry, and it's great that they've got a bunch of not just documentaries, but documentaries that they have developed.
Right.
Their attitude is that they are going to become your go-to spot to know everything you need to know about horror.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really excited when I was watching the Omen version of the Cursed Films, and like Richard Donner, the guy who directed it, is still alive. He's like in his 90s, but he is interviewed. He's interviewed extensively. He of course chalks it all up to like, well, sure, if you want to believe it's cursed, then believe it's cursed.
Right.
Like that's up to you, but don't try to put that on me because I'm not a Satanist, But he's
kind of hard to ignore, what is it? I guess synchronicity, where if you're looking for something, you're always going to find it. But it's kind of hard to ignore some of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. But
weird...
he's super interesting to listen to in the Omen documentary.
Wasn't Richard Donner wasn't he involved with Twilight Zone also? Wasn't he?
Yeah, maybe.
Was that? Because
that's Steven Spielberg and John Landis.
It was Landis where the helicopter crash killed the girl.
Yes.
And actually, did it kill 2 people?
I think it was 2 people.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, because I didn't watch it very recently, I watched it a couple months ago. They were like on the way to do the film.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ugh. That was those are the Poltergeist one too, which is it's like you lost two of your key cast members,
right?
Yeah.
And it's like God, but when they're about hauntings. I mean, it's one thing if it's a comedy, and you don't hear these things about comedies,
right?
You don't lose like Bob Hope dying in the middle of the production. Although one of the things
Bob Hope is dead.
Oh yeah, right. But he didn't die on the set. Actually, one of the things that
not on the set.
They might do. If they do they could do Blood of the Mummy's tomb. Because the director died during the casting or the closing party.
Yeah, that was his last. That was his very, very last film.
Well, not just his last film. It was the last moments of his last film. He was throwing a party for everybody and a heart attack, and he died. And so they had to hire another guy to finish off the 10 days of shooting and editing.
Right.
So, anyways, yeah. Yep. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Good call, Liz.
All right. Nick, what you got?
I'm starting with a film that Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune gave 0 out of 4 stars.
You're doing faces of death.
And Vincent Canby of the New York Times said the hosts of this film were pretty dumb because Terror in the Aisles is composed entirely of climaxes, and it has none of its own. Here's what I'm going to say about this film. This film, as I was watching it, I was like, you know what? So much of this film created my lexicon, my dictionary, my foundation of horror. Because when this came out in 1984, I knew nothing of most of these films. Mm-hmm. I had not seen most of these films. I had no idea these films even existed.
They could have called this movie Spoiler Alert.
They could have called it Spoiler Alert, although they don't really spoil anything as much as they just show you tons and tons and tons of clips. I mean, because it's exhaustive. It covers a bunch of different topics. It covers sex and terror, where they talk about Dress to Kill and Clute and Miss 45 and When a Stranger Calls. Mm-hmm. They do villains, where they talk about Dracula and Frankenstein and Friday the 13th. They do they even talk about the Marathon Man and Nighthawks and Texas Chainsaw.
For what, torture?
No, that's just in the villains. They do natural terror, where they talk about alligator, the birds, the frogs, Jaws, Nightwing.
It's a survey.
The Occult, where they talk about American Werewolf in London, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, The Omen, The Carrie, The Fog, The Fury, The Howling, The Shining, and then they do horror spoofs. But the thing that's amazing about it is, it's not directed by, but it is hosted by Donald Pleasance and Nancy Allen. I mean, that Donald Pleasance from Halloween. And the thing that's also really interesting about it is they never talk about these films as horror movies. They talk about them as terror movies, which is funny because it's like you almost never hear the word terror used anymore. It's always terror is the adjective and horror is the medium, right?
The noun.
The noun. But yeah, they talk about so of course the film is called Terror in the Aisles, and it really is a survey film, and they just kind of like slowly guide you through all of these different sort of like pockets of horror using all of these incredibly intense clips. But it's a great film, and I as I say, I went and got the VHS copy of it and watched it again, and it's really well done. Donald Pleasance is great. The sort of like the little setups that they do for each of the segments are hysterical because it all takes place in, obviously with actors in a movie theater, and Donald Pleasance is sitting with all these actors or amidst all the actors in the movie theater, and he will turn to the camera and say, "Oh my goodness, wasn't that terrifying?"
Yeah, I remember this movie because we utilized it. My friends and I, because we were doing my senior year in high school. We was in a psychology class, and we decided we wanted to do horror movies.
Right.
And so we used we started spooling.
Yeah.
Because we knew that that they had all these things, all these clips packed in.
Right.
We used Terror in the Aisles to show our class. Of course, it's R-rated material.
It's straight up R-rated material.
Just gory stuff. And
they actually don't, which is kind of surprising too. They do not pull punches, and in fact, in the sex and terror section, it is chock full of nudity.
Yep. We did not pull any of the sex and terror portions of it, but we did show a lot of the gory stuff. Too.
Yeah.
We talked about fear reactions and that kind of stuff. And then the instructor said, "That's enough." He goes, "You made your point."
Right.
and the class, half the class was like, "I can't watch," and half of it was like, "Yeah, show more." And then we got a little bit of a lecture. We got a C for that because it's like that was inappropriate. I was like, "Oh."
Not true.
It's
Not
like,
true.
but
Whoever Eric's teacher was, if you're listening to the podcast right now,
Van Vanelli, if you happen to be listening to this,
you were wrong.
Yeah,
wrong.
You forced me to do this podcast, Mr. Vanelli.
Yeah, look at him now.
But it is funny because looking at this film, I mean, as I say, so much of this film is responsible for informing kind of where I grew up with horror and kind of what my interests are, and it really helped guide and kind of inform, really everything I know today. And it is interesting too, because one of the directors we really haven't spent much time talking about really at all, frankly, is Brian De Palma, and he's featured significantly alongside obviously Alfred Hitchcock, because Brian De Palma and Alfred Hitchcock are go hand in hand, but Brian De Palma is featured, prominently in this film, and as are all his films, and in particular, Dressed to Kill because of
and Carrie,
and Carrie, and obviously Nancy Allen with Blow Up, and
wasn't Nancy Allen? She was also in Carrie.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really great film. You can actually, if you don't have a VHS copy or are not willing to go get a VHS
Mike
copy,
is willing to pirate it for you.
Somebody else has already pirated it, and you can also watch it on YouTube. And there's actually a really good quality print on YouTube, which might have been better than the VHS copy I was watching.
You kind of forget about the sketchy quality of VHS.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
So I have another survey type of film, and it covers a lot of the same era that Mike just mentioned. But this one is actually a fairly recent movie. I reviewed it for Popcorn Frights back in 2018. This is Survival of the Film Freaks.
Oh, right.
I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see it, but Mike, this is right up your alley.
Yeah.
It's all Grindhouse type stuff. But or more specifically, it's about the B movie.
Right.
And so it starts back talking about, the B movie for decades had been taking up residence at the drive-in theater, and then as the cineplexes in the suburbs started becoming the place where you saw most of your the mainstream movies, the downtown cinemas became either your Grindhouse or porn houses,
right?
Particularly in places like Times Square,
right?
And in the Tenderloin in San Francisco and some of these areas where they used to have the grand theaters, and so you'd get Big Bad Mama and Ms. 45 and Shaft and things like that showing downtown, and then you would go see the things like Star Wars out at the Metroplex. And because Jaws and Star Wars sort of changed the whole environment, and they talked about what it did to the film industry and what it did to small directors who would do science fiction movies. And it's like, well, thanks a lot, you killed us. 'Cause now it's like we used to be doing these things on the cheap, and now we got to compete with this,
right?
So there's a lot of these. They talk to a bunch of directors, including our friend of the podcast, Lloyd Kaufman, Joe Bob Briggs, Ted Raimi, Alan Green, who directed Hatchet, William Sachs, who directed Galaxina, and a bunch of other directors who talk about their love of the cult film. And none of them make any apologies. This is all about the love of the underloved, trashy, Grindhouse kind of style that goes out, and reaching all the way. There's a lot of stuff that they actually cast forward into the 90s, or not 90s, the current era of streaming and what they think about that. There's a the opinions on that vary wildly. Depending on particularly the age of the directors that they were talking to. But this tracks the lowbrow side of the horror film. The unwashed and nastier aspects of the genre from the early gore and beach party films of the 60s, through the advent of the new code and the execution of the Grindhouse in the 70s, and the VHS and cable explosion of the 80s, where it spends a good portion of the time talking about this stuff. Because it talks about VHS tape rentals bringing the ability of consumers, particularly the young consumers, to bring home R-rated content to the living room.
Oh.
Now kids had the ability to see.
That was a nice compliment calling me young, since I just went out and rented a VHS.
There
last
you
week.
go. Well, you were certainly you and I were of the age in the 1980s where we could
still
get R-rated content in the house, thanks to the video store.
Yes,
and because the thing was, a lot of the stores weren't particularly picky about, It's like if you handed them cash, you'd be more likely to get turned away at the theater trying to go into an R-rated movie than to rent an R-rated movie from the video store.
Yep.
So no more sneaking into the theaters. Now you just had to wait for the parents to go to bed, and these memories will live on for our generation of midlife horror junkies.
That's right.
It's what we grew up with. It was trashy, but we didn't care. Premium cable channels were expanding and looking for cheap content. So channels like HBO, the movie channel, and Showtime were gobbling up B-movie content like Deathstalker, Hard Ticket to Hawaii, Maniac, Fright Night, and The Howling that would just play late at night because it's what these stations could afford, because trying to get Kramer versus Kramer was expensive. And so...
And kind of a downer, too.
Yeah, right. Because who really wants to see a movie about divorce when you can see a werewolf, right?
Or Maniac.
Yeah. But they would play it after hours, which is when you would have... Teenagers would have sleepovers, which replaced the drive-in movie makeout session. Now it was sort of sleepovers. And then Survival of the Film Freaks fondly looks back at the period where legions of young horror fans developed their thirst for the scary and the sleazy, blood, boobs, biker gangs, and exploding helicopters. So I ask you, what more could an impressionable teen ask for? This is a celebration of all that. And the speculation of whether that... whether the notion of streaming content and access to all this with a wide range of content, whether this is still something that young people today will gobble up.
Yeah. Who directed this again?
This is directed by Bill Fulkerson and Kyle Kuchta.
Okay.
And,
have they done anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But they did. They certainly have. I think they're well connected. They have. Again, like a lot of the documentaries, or the ones that I've been reviewing. I know that there's some other ones where where you settle in with a single person for the whole time. But this is interviewing a lot of people, and they're all funny, right? They're all these snarky. Sometimes super enthusiastic. Some people, like, if you listen to Lloyd Kaufman with us, you realize what a great person and what a great character he is.
Oh my gosh!
And how much he understands. He understands everything that he's doing, and despite how tawdry the stuff is, but he loves it. He's actually a brilliant man.
Oh my gosh! Absolutely.
And it's not lowest common denominator because it's the only thing that he can understand. It's because it's with intent.
Right.
So, anyways,
Survival of the Film Freaks,
and that is certainly available streaming now. You can catch this on iTunes and Amazon, wherever you download your streaming content.
All right,
Liz.
Okay, my second choice is a documentary called Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue.
Yeah.
From 2009. It's directed by Andrew Monument, and it's based on a book by Joseph Madry, and it's about the horror films and how American horror films and how they've changed with different social conflicts during the 20th and 21st centuries.
Nice.
It features Joe Dante, John Carpenter, Darren Lynn Bousman, Mick Garris, George Romero, and it's narrated by Lance Hendrickson. And it's just very interesting to see, the early era 20s up through the wars, then like the atomic age, the 60s and the 70s, of course, then went crazy bloody as a result of the Vietnam War and people coming home from World War II, but more in the 60s. That's when those people were making movies. And then the 70s was really Vietnam. And in the 80s, the slasher genre, consumerism, things like that, and the home video, being able to put anything and everything in your hands.
Yep.
And the only bummer about this one is it really much goes to like 2004, because that's when the book was. It was made in 2009, so they were able to add a little bit, but so you don't get
current.
Much more. You know what I mean? Like more newer stuff.
But you get about 100 years of content or 80 years of content.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you do, and you get like, they talk about Silence of the Lambs, Seven, American Psycho, things like that. They talk about how then September 11th influenced things, and then the boom of remakes in the early 2000s.
Right.
Remaking Texas Chainsaw Massacre, remaking Dawn of the Dead, and how was what was going on then, mirroring what was going on at the time of the originals.
I saw this. I hadn't gotten around to it. It was definitely on my to watch list. But do they talk about how American directors react to foreign influence, or is it pretty much straight up just American?
They do a little bit talk about foreign movies, but it's mostly just focusing on American film.
Sure, right? Yeah, that was certainly the way it was portrayed. Was it was American horror pictures and a reflection on American culture.
Why are the American films like this?
Right.
What is happening in America to cause this change in the horror landscape? It's really good. It's available on Prime for free.
Yeah,
and it's definitely worth a watch. It's under 2 hours, and it's solid.
Yeah, I remember when this came out, and I think I watched a VHS copy of it. I saw it at the movie store, and I was really excited. And I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be great!" And it was. It was a really great survey of American horror. It was just a nice,
because it's different than everywhere else.
Yeah, and it was just a nice tight compendium. Because some of these horror films, or some of these horror documentaries, get way too long in the tooth and feel compelled to talk about every last element of whatever the genre is, and you don't need to.
Right.
You can cut out a lot of fat real fast.
Yeah.
Some people don't know that.
This is a
They
survey.
have not learned that.
It's not going to really probably show you anything you've never heard of before, except maybe some of the older films.
Right.
But it's nice to kind of tie them all together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my second film is sort of like a true crime film. It's a true crime film involving people in the horror industry, and this is Blood and Flesh, the real REEL life and ghastly death of Al Adamson. If you know Al Adamson, he did things like, Psycho a Go-Go, The Blood of Ghastly Horror, Dracula versus Frankenstein, Hell's Bloody Devils, Brain of Blood, I Spit on Your Corpse, The Dynamite Brothers, Blazing Stewardesses, Black Heat, Black Samurai, The Kill Factor, Uncle Tom's Cabin. You name it. He did it. Al Adamson was the ultimate huckster.
Wow.
I don't think I've seen any of those movies.
Me neither.
Then you are missing out. No, Al Adamson, he was a guy that was, both of his parents were involved in the film industry. I'll give you the super quick synopsis. Both parents were involved in the film industry. He sort of fell into film work in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but he sort of fell into it and said, I think I can do this, or at least figure out how to do it. And he started doing exploitation films in the 60s and 70s, but he was kind of like the ultimate miserly penny pincher. And he was like, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it on the cheap. I'm not going to pay these people. I'm not going to pay those people. I'm going to get my friends to do crap that they probably shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to get any permits. We're just going to go and do this stuff. And then after we do it, we're going to cut this stuff up and basically keep rehashing the same film over and over and over with slightly different titles.
Kind of like a Hanna-Barbera loop.
Yeah, exactly. He was truly... it was a really interesting character because he was gregarious, outspoken, big fella who I think was just a real backslapper, glad hander, and he just had you under his spell. And But his interest, funny enough, were making these really crappy, cheap films. After the 1970s, when things started to slow down, I mean, he dabbled with biker films. He dabbled with some of the drug films. He dabbled with.
It's kind of a guy who you'd expect to go into porn.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, some of the things touched on sort of softcore porn, but he then dabbled in blaxploitation, and then I think he kind of had run his course, and he got into the real estate market. And he married his long time girlfriend and star of many of the films, Regina Carroll, and he effectively retired, and he was redoing this house out in the middle of nowhere in I think Central Valley, California. He hired a live-in contractor who began to work on his house, but the guy was working at just like a snail's pace. Well, it turned out that the guy was essentially just this sort of vagabond kind of grifter, and was slowly it was a very, very slow get rich quick scheme where he was bilking Al Adamson out of his money with the idea of eventually killing him. And he did. He spoiler alert, kills Al Adamson and buries him under a built-in in-ground hot tub.
Wow.
And then
how long did it take them to discover this? Was it fairly? Was it like
it was?
Because it sounds like something that he had planned.
It was. I think it was a couple months after Al Adamson went missing. They eventually started, talking to and kind of like focused in on this guy, and everybody, the contractor, and everybody that the police talked to about the contractor said, "Oh yeah, he was really shiftless. He was a really scummy character."
It sounds like that Al Adamson may have made a number of enemies in his wake because of his unscrupulous business ways.
That is a very interesting point. You would think so, but everybody they interview, all the people that he sort of like didn't pay, bilked out of money, got people to do things that they probably shouldn't have been doing, all talked about it in very loving terms. And it was like,
I love that guy.
I was like, oh yeah, we never got paid for any of this stuff, and and Al still owes me money, and Al got me to do the craziest stunts that were like super unsafe, and yeah, I mean all these old timers that did these films with him in the 50s or 60s and 70s were like, oh, he was just a great guy.
But it was kind of a thing where it's almost like because he was doing the kinds of films that he was doing, and people walked in with that understanding.
Right.
It would be different if you were, say, Quentin Tarantino and not paying your people.
Right. Yeah. You were going into this with the proviso, with the understanding that this is being done totally on the cheap and probably illegally.
Right.
so yes, buyer beware.
Kinda, yeah. The fact that these films probably you just rattled off about 15 films, and I can't recall any of what you just had mentioned.
Blazing Stewardesses.
Blazing Stewardesses, yes. Blood of Dracula's Castle, Dracula versus Frankenstein. In fact, if you want to see who is largely credited as the worst Dracula of all time is in Dracula versus Frankenstein, and it is actually Al Adamson's accountant who he gets to play Dracula. And the guy, it's like if you imagine an accountant playing Dracula. It is terrible. But yeah, I do recommend it. It is, much like Liz just mentioned, it is one of the many, many documentary horror offerings on Shudder right now. I think this is a Shudder original, The Blood and Flesh, The Real Life and Ghastly Death of Al Adamson. It came out last year. And as soon as, I only discovered it because I was scrolling through the Shudder documentary offerings, and it was like, one of the most recently produced films. So it's super interesting. You don't have to be a horror fan to be interested in this. You can be a true crime fan, or you can just be a fan of a pretty fascinating murder mystery, and this will resonate with you. Eric, what is the best horror documentary of all time? Go.
I don't know if it's the best.
Okay.
Every time you say this, I always have to hedge my bets.
Well, don't you always save your best one for last? I always try to save the best one for last.
I usually try and save the one that I don't think that you guys are picking for last.
That's not the best.
Which is it's a strategic move, rather. But this one very well could be. This is an Alexandra O. Philippe movie.
Oh, heck yeah.
So
this guy kills it.
This is Memory, The Origins of Alien, from released in 2019. And I figured that our number one horror movie on scariestthings.com, 1T, deserves it's the best documentary done about it, of which there are many. Right. To be my number one. So there you go.
There you go.
So Felipe is getting pretty good at this horror documentary thing. Memory explores the roots of Alien as it pertains to the artistic direction and the timelessness of the story to establish why this movie is such a classic. There have been a number of making of movies for Alien, particularly those contained within DVD extras, but this is something very different. As opposed to being just a reflection upon Ripley and Sigourney Weaver, and the technical description of how the movie was made, Memory attempts to dig into the underlying philosophical thought behind the film. And despite this being a science fiction tale from the probably not too far future, Felipe argues that Alien taps into ancient and classical tropes that resonate on a deeply cultural level. And it starts with, and Mike has referred to this before about Alien, is that Alien is a completely movie fabricated from the pieces and parts of other movies.
It's a total ripoff. I thought it was a total ripoff of The Green Slime, but this is it's much more complicated.
It's much more complicated than that. And this movie, this film goes about that. It starts with a young Dan O'Bannon,
but they don't really talk about The Green Slime in this film.
Just very briefly.
They
slip past it. They talk about a number of other ones,
right? But not the Green Slime.
But they actually have a roster of films that Dan O'Bannon puts out there, and so what they talk about is young Dan O'Bannon, the creator of the story,
right?
Says, "I didn't steal from anyone. I stole from everyone."
Right.
So O'Bannon was directly influenced by a couple of comic book stories, Seeds of Jupiter, which involved something that resembled a peach pit that a sailor that his buddies convinced him to swallow, but it happened to be a seed from space, and it comes busting out of him later on. And another story called Death Rattle, both of which explored this parasitic invader changing the poor human victim into something awful. Another influence of Dan O'Bannon is the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft, particularly the story At the Mountains of Madness.
Right.
And at that time, he was drafting up a screenplay, and he had he actually references, and this show also talks about It, the Terror from Beyond Space, The Thing from Another World from 1951, Planet of the Vampires from 1962, Queen of Blood from 1966, and Green Slime from 1969. So all these movies heavily influenced sort of the idea. I mean, it's a monster in a spaceship, right? It's not wholly new,
right?
But he eventually gets signed on to do Dark Star with John Carpenter, and he's actually he co-directed it.
Right.
He was a star in the movie. But Carpenter screwed him over by not giving him any director's credit, and they did Dark Star was largely a comedy.
But I got the impression though after watching the movie that Dan O'Bannon was pretty self-destructive.
He was, yeah. He had
which, and if you go if you look at his film credits and writing credits, it's like ain't that many.
No,
because he was just so hyper focused on what he wanted that it was just everybody else be damned.
Yeah.
And
he held on to this one. I think the fortunate thing, that he did. He had some lucky breaks. He got brought on to Alejandro Jodorowsky's project for Dune, which is actually another. I think we referred to it before. Travis Stevens produced awesome documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, which is one of the best. It's not a horror documentary, but it is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it was there that he met Ron Shusett. He met H.R. Giger. He met Ron Cobb. He met a lot of people who would go on to become part of the Alien production team. But that whole thing collapsed, and then he ended up coming back to L.A. with his tail between his legs and trying to sell off a film called Memory, in which was the prototype Alien thing. And then Ron Shusett, who co-wrote this with him, came up with the idea of the chest burster. Then the movie became Star Beast, and Walter Hill was going to be the director for that movie. and Walter Hill looked at this and he goes, "Wow, this movie's shit, but I think that this whole chest bursting thing could be very interesting."
Right.
And then he goes, "Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do Southern Comfort instead," which was probably a big mistake for him because, it's not, as they say in the movie, it's like not a bad movie, Southern Comfort, but it ain't Alien.
Southern Comfort's awesome.
Yeah, but yeah, it is. I really like. It's a good movie, but it's not. Yeah. But it doesn't have. It's like it doesn't have the provenance now that Alien does.
Sure.
But
what was your big takeaway from
the big thing was that they paired up Dan O'Bannon,
right,
Ridley Scott, and H.R. Giger.
Right.
Eventually, Giger was hired, and then they fired him because the Fox people thought he was just too disturbing.
Right.
They thought that the dude was weird, and they thought his art was gross.
Right.
They didn't want anything to do with him.
Yeah.
And so then then when they hired Ridley Scott goes, "I want Giger on the project."
Yeah, I mean that kind of was. I think you're right. That was it was like lightning in a bottle.
It was
getting those three like on the same page.
All of them had the same vision.
But they shouldn't have been by all
because
accounts.
you had this as you referred to, this highly anxious, sort of self-consumed Dan O'Bannon,
right,
a Midwesterner who had the idea of a space bug on the ship, and you have this young British visionary and this weirdo Austrian artist.
Right.
There's no reason why these guys should have been in synchronicity like they were, and they all had this love of H.P. Lovecraft stuff.
Right.
And that was and that whole thing when they talk about memory and ancient lore and things beyond the realm of human imagination, that's what made this movie different than everything that preceded it. It was that combination, and that's what elevated it. And so you go through, I mean, they talk about the chest burster scene in detail. They talk about the space jockey scene in detail. And it's just brilliant the way that Felipe is his the way that he weaves in his interviews and the way that he does these subtle shifty animations in there. It always keeps it very interesting. I wanted more. I wanted it to keep going. It was one of those ones where
I could have watched it. Although at the beginning with all the weird
the sirens. No, that part,
I was like, what the hell's happening?
I could have done without some of the Greek the harpies or the sirens or whatever that kind of stuff. It's like, no, that's stretching it a bit too much. But you hit the nail on the head in so many of these other things.
Oh yeah. So good.
And
so good.
Some weird. The other thing that I got out of it was that there's an artist named Francis Bacon who did these.
Oh yeah. That was
art
super
that was like
interesting.
really disturbing. Really disturbing stuff. That was like, I don't. It would. It's nightmare fuel.
Yep.
Anyways,
all right.
Rhino Felipe, this might come up again. I don't know if we're going to see that, but he's done 4 or 5 movies that will rank that they are in my top 20 dead list for
Alexander.
I'm sorry,
Felipe.
Yeah, Ryan Felipe is that's an actor, a tow-headed, curly-haired young actor who kind of petered out in the 90s. So, all right. After that, Liz.
Okay, my number 1 horror documentary. It's going to be no surprise that it's a show, and it's about to have its 3rd season, and it's Eli Roth's History of Horror.
Yay!
Again, this is on Shudder, and here's why that this is my number 1 pick. First, I'm a big Eli Roth fan, so take him or leave him. He could be the inventor of torture porn, because Hostel is kind of the first movie I remember that phrase being coined for, but he is a fan first, and then a creator second. Also, he can get big names. Yep. So you've got, everybody. Tarantino, Greg Nicotero, Jamie Lee Curtis, Rob Zombie, Ari Aster, John Carpenter, like every director, Linda Blair, Tony Todd, everybody is there. Stephen King on his episodes contributing to this show. What he does is in his first season, he goes by genre. So we've got zombies, slashers, demons, killer creatures, vampires, and ghost stories. And then in season 2, we have like houses of hell, he calls them, monsters, body horror, witches, chilling children. And season 3, it got renewed, and it should be coming out the end of this year, also on Shudder and AMC, because Shudder owns or AMC owns Shudder.
But has he done Arbor Day horror yet? Or handicapped horror?
Not Arbor Day horror. I will write to him. Eli, we've got a topic.
Come on. We beat you to the punch.
The reason that I like this one so much is because of how new it is and that it's still ongoing. Mm-hmm. That's why you're getting Ari Aster. They're talking about Hereditary. They're talking about Good Night, Mommy. They're talking about all these movies that, when we talk, we're saying it's a new golden age of horror. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these documentaries, while they're awesome, unless they're focused on one film that's old, if they're old, you're going to miss so many cool new things that you can include. Yep. So you get your classics, you get your 80s, 90s, 2000s, but now we're getting things, new millennium movies. And he'll touch on oldies, but he kind of doesn't go back further than the 70s.
Right.
So for a person like
so
me,
his history of horror
not
to
a
the
huge fan of
69.
classics, this is for you.
I like it. In fact, I will, in the interest of full disclosure, I will say I watch the Eli Roth's History of Horror to look for possible topics we could steal for this very podcast, and B, see if I can learn anything about the history of horror. Because you're right, Liz. I mean, the cast of characters he draws into the history of horror is, I mean, it's like no other horror documentary. The caliber of people he brings in, and I also like the fact that he keeps it to a nice, really, really tight time frame too. He doesn't sort of like there's no sort of over exposition on.
It doesn't meander.
Doesn't meander. It keeps it super, super tight. It's like when he's interviewing, whether it's Jamie Lee Curtis or Rob Zombie, it's just like you just get a couple quick pull quotes about whatever the subject is and why that resonates with that specific person.
Yep. And I found that actually to be true with a lot of the documentaries.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liz.
No. Well, I was going to say that is a good point, but he does do an audio podcast version,
which is with super good too.
Stuff if you want more.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Although he doesn't do all of them, there's a gentleman who's attached to it who does them, who's not the ones that Eli Roth is involved with, which is usually like the bigger name directors like Ari Aster or like Ken Faree, but the other guy does everybody else, and he's not as good as Eli Roth.
Yeah, I think
because Eli Roth is a very compelling interviewer.
You appreciate what a fan he is.
Yep.
And the fact that when he does remakes of stuff, that he does it, that he has the respect of the people who originally did the films too.
Right.
And I think that there is an active horror community, and it's this goes back to some things that we've talked about it with Mick Garris about the Masters of Horror.
Yeah.
In that the genre that I think feels that there's a sense of community, but it takes someone like Eli Roth or Mick Garris to keep the community to hang together.
Yeah.
Because when you're a director, you're often in your own silo, and then in order to get out and to and to actually to talk with your colleagues, it's like the nice thing about the horror genre is that it seems to be fairly non-competitive,
right?
Relative, that they're supportive of each other. They always like to see what their compatriots are doing, as opposed to what I suspect your Roland Emmerich, Michael Bay type of sort of competitions, or James Cameron, right? It's like wanting to outdo each other.
Yep.
So, anyways, the Eli Roth stuff. It's a good fun. It's an easy watch.
Oh, for sure.
And
you
do like that he also knows how to bring people on who will be entertaining.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
To be and they're people you want to hear from, but they're also very interesting people.
Yep.
Because I think
some are his friends. I mean, Slash is on there. Like what does Slash really have to say about horror movies? Just watching him with his buddy.
Well, Rob, and as much as
it's a good group.
We rag on Rob Zombie. He's a good interview.
He's a super fan too, and he knows his stuff.
He does, and he sometimes gets in his way in his movies. But anyhow, go watch that.
He's good to have on a documentary.
Mike, what's your closing call?
This is a film that came out in 2020 that Mike Campbell from the Scariest Things podcast said, there exists that great space in documentaries that take place decades after the event occurred. It's this beautiful melange of revisionist history, lucid thoughts, purposeful sleepwalking, and repressed memories. This is also an Alexandre Felipe film.
Ryan Felipe.
Not Ryan Felipe. This is Alexandre Felipe. This is Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist, which is now, when I did the review for this, it was not really available because I did the review through Nightstream, and we were one of the first reviewers of the film last fall. I think I did the review in October. It is an incredible film, and unlike a lot of the films we've talked about, which are kind of sort of survey histories of horror or survey of a specific genre of horror, this is the only person in the film is William Friedkin, and he is the only person talking throughout the entire film. And much like you left with Alien, the Alien documentary, is the same way. I was like, I could listen to William Friedkin talk about The Exorcist for another 5 hours. Yep. It was so incredibly fascinating. I think I talked a little bit about some of the key elements that I learned about The Exorcist. A, that Stacy Keach was originally hired to play the role of Father Karras. That B, William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist, also wanted to play the part of Father Karras. That Stanley Kubrick and Mike Nichols were first offered to do the film, but passed. The fact that Mercedes McCambridge, who did the voice of Reagan, told William Friedkin that the only way she could manufacture the demon sounds was through a steady diet of alcohol, raw eggs, cigarettes, and mild torture. And he said, yes, let's do all that. And she said, yeah, but I'm a alcoholic. And he said, yeah, let's do it anyway. Let's get you smoking cigarettes, drinking booze, eating raw eggs, and we'll torture you a little bit. The fact that William Friedkin admitted to firing off weapons and punching his actors before certain scenes, specifically to startle them and rattle them and put them like off in a sort of a off their footing. The fact that he asked his good friend Lalo Schifrin to score the film, and Lalo Schifrin, of course, is Academy Award winning composer. After he did it, he handed it in, and William Friedkin said, "This is total garbage." They never spoke again after that. And they were like good friends too. I mean, the thing that's great about this film is that you learn so much about The Exorcist. I think the reason I gave this 4 out of 5 stars was because the things he didn't touch on, which I was hoping he would. He didn't talk about The Exorcist 2. He didn't talk about The Exorcist 3, which obviously aren't related to, but it would be, I was just super curious to know what William Friedkin...
Even if he wanted to talk shit about it.
Yeah. Like, what do you think about these films?
Yeah.
And then I also didn't know... it was unclear his relationship with Linda Blair, and it was like that's such a critical piece.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Because he talks about how close they were during the filming of it, but it would be really interesting to know if like they are still in contact at all, and if their relationship is good, bad, or indifferent. But otherwise, super fascinating, really interesting deep dive into The Exorcist. If you are a fan of The Exorcist or don't know anything, or you think you know everything about The Exorcist, I thought I did. I didn't at all. This will take you on a journey that is really quite shocking. And the other thing too is it will give you a lot of. He talks a lot about the sort of his influences in making The Exorcist. I mean, much like you get into with Dan O'Bannon's influences related to Alien. I mean, this is sort of like William Friedkin kind of lays out all the things that sort of made. That sort of put his film lexicon together, everything from the Danish film Ordet to Citizen Kane and everything else in between. Yeah, great movie.
Our friend of the podcast, Sharon Yablon, that apparently William Friedkin does periodic sort of just little symposiums down in L.A. She likes to go to. So that's one of those kinds of things. He's still very active within the L.A. film community,
right?
And likes to hold shop. So it's not surprising that he was willing to do a deep dive into his movie.
Well, and I think he really is sort of that bridge between old Hollywood and new Hollywood. I mean, he really is. I mean, he sort of came about in the 1960s, and so he was that bridge to the sort of 40s and 50s, and he's still doing stuff, to this day. So he's like that bridge to the contemporary filmmaking. Great documentary, super fascinating.
Felipe is he like there are some guys like him, Ken Burns, right? There are these people who are synonymous with, if they're doing a documentary, you've got to check it out. Because I think he first came to popular knowledge through The People versus George Lucas,
right?
But he also did Dock of the Dead,
right,
which is a zombie. It's a great, zombie bit.
Great film.
7852, which was done pretty recently, which is more than just a deep dive into a movie, but this is Hitchcock's shower scene.
Yeah,
and it is a whole documentary based upon just that. It is he. And he makes it really interesting. I mean, it's not just that he manages to find interesting topics, but he will engage you and keep you through the whole thing.
You can read Robert's review of 7852 on the Scariest Things website, scariesttthings.com, 1T.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's do a rundown of our documentary selections.
Yes, absolutely.
I started off with 24 by 36, a movie about movie posters, directed by Kevin Burke. Followed that up with Survival of the Film Freaks, about B movie Grindhouse Fair, directed by Bill Fulkerson and Kyle Kuchta. And the last one I had, we were just talking about the gentleman, Alexandre O. Felipe's Memory, The Origins of Alien from 2019. Liz.
Okay, I had Cursed Films, which is a Shudder original. Then I had Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. And finishing out with Eli Roth's History of Horror, also on Shudder.
All right, my list included Terror in the Isles, the 1984 documentary film about terror, aka horror. I want to say 2019, 2020 film Blood and Flesh, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson, also on Shudder. And then finally, this is kind of a longer-ish title, Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist. It says it's 2019. We obviously saw it in 2020. I don't know who the hell saw it in 2019. I think it's
2020.
2020. But this is what I will say about all these films that all of us have mentioned tonight. If you went and watched all these films, I think you would be a very, very well-educated horror fan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another thing is all these movies have colons in them.
A lot of colons.
Lots of colons.
Lots of colons. All right.
I do just a little, because it deserves just a small little follow-up.
Yeah.
Some other ones that I have seen that really deserve, and that we didn't get to talk to, but Corman's World, Exploits of a Hollywood Rebel, which was great. Room 237, which is the weirdo Shining movie. Birth of the Living Dead, which is a George Romero retrospective done by Rod Cones. Why Horror, which talks about horror fandom, directed by Nicholas Kleiman. And then also another one, King Cohen, about Roger Cohen, Larry Cohen. Roger Corman, Larry Cohen. From 2017, done just before he passed away. But he is the guerrilla filmmaker, and a great loving. All these ones about the individual directors are it makes you love the men who are behind the camera.
Yep.
So a couple of underdog movies, Wolfman's Got Nards, and also Best Worst Movie, which are about the underdog movies.
That was my backup.
Yeah, those movies are fun because they are movies that failed at the box office, were considered best worst movie is about Troll 2, which is some people call the worst movie ever done.
Right. Which it's not.
And it's it's a terrible movie, but the fact that it found a cult status, but it also shows the limitations to being a cult movie, which I thought was brilliant. So anyways, more things, you can check them all out on our dead lists on the website. And who's got the tagline to lead us out of here?
Liz has a tagline.
And this is the tagline from Eli Roth's History of Horror, and it applies to all of these, and it is, every scream tells a story.
Nice. Yes. Agreed.
Way to wrap it up, Eli.